Hello and welcome to India's World. Japan has brought international focus once again to its maritime dispute with China, this time in the East China Sea. Tokyo has called on Beijing to stop construction of oil and gas platforms in the undemarcated waters of the East China Sea. There is no agreement on a maritime boundary between the two countries about their respective exclusive economic zones. However, plans of joint gas drilling in the East China Sea were initially agreed upon by both parties in 2008. But Japan wants to postpone the gas field project till a mutually agreed upon demarcation is done. Under Japan's proposed demarcation, China's gas platforms are still theoretically on the Chinese side. Japan is concerned, however, that this could mean tapping into reservoirs that extend into Japanese territory. Earlier last week, Japan's Defense Ministry presented a white paper on defense of Japan outlining the various threats the country faces, especially in the Asia-Pacific region. The white paper paid special attention to the offshore gas platforms that China has been constructing in the disputed waters since June 2013. To discuss the rising tensions in the Japan-China maritime dispute in the East China Sea, we have with us a very distinguished panel of experts. We have with us Ambassador Aftab, a renowned diplomat. He's been India's ambassador to Greece, Vietnam and Japan. Professor Alka Acharya, she's director of the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi, and also professor of Chinese Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Dr. Srabani Choudhary, she teaches Japanese Studies at the Center for East Asian Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. I welcome you all to this discussion. Ambassador Seth, let me begin with you. Tell us briefly, what is the nature of maritime conflicts between Japan and China?
Oh, if you want to know what the immediate reason is it's of course Chinese assertiveness, which is the cause for a lot of the problems in both the East China Sea and in the South China Sea. But there is a history, of course, to this, and it goes back at least 100 years. It goes back to 1895, when the Japanese defeated the Chinese and detached Formosa, now Taiwan, and also got some more territory on the Japanese mainland, which they were forced to disgorge under Russian pressure, principally, but also the pressure of the others. So there is this long, 100-year-old at least, territorial problem, which has its maritime dimensions. But the immediate cause of this, as I said, is Chinese assertiveness, and not only against Japan, but against all its immediate neighbors, the Philippines, and in particular Vietnam, which you would recall last year had its own oil rig floating around in its territorial waters.
Alka, whether it is Senkaku, Diaoyu Islands, or the creation of the East China Sea air defense identification zones, or now the controversy of the gas platforms, are these conflicts worth the amount of friction, worth in economic terms, worth the amount of friction that they've created between Japan and China?
Well, they started because of the supposed reserves of oil, minerals, deposits. If you go back, of course, 100 years is just the start of it. The Chinese go back to the Ming dynasty, where they say that their claims to the disputed Diaoyu, or the Senkaku as the Japanese call it, date back to the Ming. So the history, it becomes quite futile to just go into history, because then we have not just historical records, but then the cultural dimensions come in, and then Japanese-Chinese rivalry and all that. But I think if you go, 1970 is the time when supposedly the Japanese discovered certain traces of oil in the rocks around the Senkakus. So they move after that. The Chinese keep quiet till 1970. That's when the Americans start to support Japan, because they have a treaty with Japan, and the idea is that they will also take part of the booty. And then the Chinese don't say anything much, except when they start to normalize relations with the Americans, because then they are quite sure that, okay, the Americans will not create too much of a problem. They start to assert their own historical claims, and matters come to a head in 1990. So in a sense, the discovery of the oil is what trigger off the latest phase of this conflict. And now we've come to the point where the actual drilling and so on is going on.
But in 2008, they had agreed for joint exploration, hadn't they?
And even this year in January, both the sides sat down and they said that let's sort out this problem peacefully. Yeah. So it's not as if, this projection that they are at each other's throats needs to be contextualized in the continuous discussion also that has been going on. I think if we project something or some action to the detriment of other things that are going on, then we'll get a very lopsided picture. Okay. So I think the Japanese and the Chinese are from time to time also realizing that they need to sort it out, and it'll have to be done diplomatically.
Srabani, why do you think that the Defense of Japan white paper put special emphasis on China's unilateral development work in East China Sea in the background of what Alka has just told us about the possibility of working jointly? What are the Japanese concerns besides oil and gas in this region?
I think, a bit of history is, of course, going to always overlap the views that each of these countries take. Current assertion by Japan with respect to oil rigging, I think, goes back to the defense white paper, because if you know that the defense white paper was delayed by 7 days because the Diet wanted a specific terms and paragraph added with respect to the East China Sea issue. So once that was done, I think Japan needed to bring to the international community the issue that it technically, the 16 pictures that was put up in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website. But interestingly, if you look at it technically, Japan cannot really say much, because it's still, by their own definition of demarcation, China is on their side of the sea. But why Japan wishes to bring it to the forefront is probably because on the other side, that the negotiations that are going on with respect to the East China Sea issues, the international community is, balancing or where does international community stand with respect to Japan, China's this issue. These are the kind of incidences where Japan can figure out where it is. It can figure out its own political public opinion. And if you look at the public opinion thing from 2003 till date, it's increasing quantumly. And for Abe, that's also important, because he's also looking at Article 9 all at one end. So all this moves Japan to push these things in the forefront of the international community and dialogue.
So he got the Liberal Democratic Party to delay the paper. That is the significance of it then. Okay. So we need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again with this interesting discussion in a bit. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are discussing the escalating tensions between Japan and China in the East China Sea. Ambassador Seth, Japan has confirmed, as Srabani pointed out, that these 16 offshore structures are on the Chinese side of the equidistant line, because there is no EEZ demarcated, so they've taken the median line. So it's on the Chinese side. Now, all but 3 of these maritime structures were constructed in 2013, 2014, before the historic meeting between Abe and Xi in November last year. So why is Japan raising this issue now? Is it because of Article 9 that Japan wants to become a normal state? Are they domestic considerations, or are they international considerations?
Well, to go back to the Xi-Abe meeting in November in Beijing, on the sidelines, I think, of the APEC summit, while they were meeting there, actually while his national security advisor, Shotaro Yachi, was meeting his counterpart to prepare the ground for this summit, the Chinese fishing boats were off the Ogasawara Islands, which are part of the Tokyo metropolitan territory, taking illegally all their red coral. It's rather like when Xi was here on September 17th, 2014, they were fiddling around in Ladakh.
Yeah.
So the Chinese do this, do with the right hand something while they do something else with the left. So why Abe didn't say anything in November is because obviously he was trying to see if there couldn't be some kind of rapprochement with President Xi Jinping. And why he's saying it now is precisely this, what Srabani said, that the defense paper is up for discussion in the Diet. There has been a lot of public disquiet about the manner in which this was debated or not debated in the lower house and so on. But this assertion of the Japanese rights to the Senkaku at this particular point of time helps in getting this crucial piece of legislation to make Japan a more normal country through. And that's why I think you've got this. Plus, 15th August is the 70th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, and there is pressure from China, amongst others, for Abe to say things. So, for him to assert now against the Chinese is opportune, and it is in his book appropriate.
Okay. Alka, what were the plans that were jointly agreed in 2008 for exploration of oil and gas in the East China Sea, and why could they not be operationalized? Why did China decide to move unilaterally?
I think the problem is that even as this attempt to come to some kind of a bilateral understanding takes place, there are international legal dimensions as well. Now, the question really is that at the end of the day, both sides are looking to establish, either by means of unilateral action or through other means, to solidify or strengthen their claims. Because ultimately, even if you get into a joint agreement, there are going to be issues about division of the booty, what is going to be the base, and who has greater rights, lesser rights. You know, I think the broad agreement that was reached in 2008 still had to be refined in terms of the nitty-gritty, you know, the details had to be spelled out, and those got bogged down in a lot of technicalities. In the meantime, the Chinese realized that the name of the game is you create the situation on the ground which would somehow strengthen your claims. That's what the ADIZ was all about, because at the end of the day, they decided that they would take a leaf out of the American book and establish this ADIZ, which would help them to extend their claims to EEZs. And this, I think by now it's quite clear, and Srabani can sort of bear me out here, that the ADIZ was specifically with their eye on the Tiaoyu and the kind of EEZ that they would get with regard to this island. Okay. And because it was the Japanese who had moved, you know, that attempt to privatize nationalize the thing, it was in private hands. You know, if you go back, it's an interesting thing that the Chinese have been responding and reacting to what they feel would be moves which would establish status quo against them. So you react to that, or you counter it, or you take unilateral action, and that is basically the. Now that is creating alarm bells all around, because this unilateralism never goes down well.
Srabani, do the Chinese platform fall outside the geographical scope of the 2008 agreement, potentially affecting Japan's reservoir claims on gas, saying that the gas beds could extend to their territory?
See, essentially this maritime issue and oil exploration across any of these international sharing, there has to be certain kind of trust and understanding. Until unless that is there, you always have this problem happening elsewhere also. So out here, the issue is very strong, you know, like Japan would like to project it as this fear, the fear that oil. But if you look at it, you know, Japan had in another island called Yonaguni Island, they had put in the self-defense force, kept a radar at I think April 2014. At that point of time, China had made a lot of issue, but Japan was very much within their territory. Yet China had made an issue. So
but
I
China
think
is also very much within.
This time, China is within the territory, and Japan is making an issue.
And the joint exploration would have been probably in the overlapping area of claim.
Yeah.
Not on the Chinese side of the equidistant line.
Yes. So effectively, what I mean to say is, like, if you look at that other island of Yonaguni Island's case, when China made a hue and cry about Japan sending a troop, radar, etc., and right now Japan making a strong claim against this, I think it has more of domestic reason for doing it rather than actually technically or in the international. By going by the international law, they are not at fault.
Okay.
See, and even this Chinese-Japanese side is notional. Till such time as the ownership issue is contested by both sides, this median line and so on are simply notional, and so you will always have that underlying tension about this contest for sovereignty.
Okay. Ambassador Seth, what do you think of Japanese apprehensions, as she was saying about Chinese apprehensions earlier, that the drilling platforms that China has set up could be used for military purposes? Now, Defense Minister General Nakatani told Japanese Diet that China could deploy a radar system on the platform and use it as an operating base for helicopters or drones conducting air patrols. Do you think that is possible? Because from whatever I've been reading, people say there is no need for China to do this. They have their drone bases which are working efficiently. They're not known to put radars on oil drilling platforms. These are fears that Japan is unnecessarily creating.
Well, if you see some of the other shoals and reefs that they have built up on in the South China Sea, they are clearly with a military objective in mind. They have put places where helicopters can land, where ships can dock, and so on and so forth. So maybe there is some ground to the apprehension expressed by Mr. Minister Gen Nakatani, because the Chinese could do to the rig what they have done in the South China Sea.
Okay, all right. We need to take a break again at this point. We'll be back again in a bit. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're discussing the escalating tension between Japan and China in the East China Sea. Srabani, why is Japan trying to attract the attention of the world to a series of Chinese high-handed maritime advances so publicly? What does it hope to gain by this?
There are, I think, the entire story can be looked at from three different fronts. One is domestically.
Yeah, which you have talked about earlier. Yeah.
Earlier, the public opinion creation that can happen with these bringing to the notice. Second is to the international community. Japan fears American withdrawal, and Japan would need to take larger calls with respect to Asia. And if it seeks to be one of the powers that drives Asia, it needs to have an international community behind it. And this is the second reason why it does. The third reason continues to be Japanese economic issues of having secured sea lines, etc., with respect to oil movement and movement of commodity. And this is where I think the reason why Japan constantly brings it to the platforms or to the viewership of larger audience. The point is, if you look at the incidences in itself, there are sometimes incidences are very little. If you look at it, it does happen at many times. It doesn't get into the focus. It's squabble between two entities. But I think what fear continues to be an issue which even international community sometimes stands by is sometimes at the top level things might not be bad, but by accident, if at the bottom or the ground level things go wrong. And that has, if you see, manifested off and on at various point of time. And I think that is why Japan wants it to be kind of in news in the international community.
Alka, do you think Japan is being encouraged to get into a confrontation with China? And would this lead to another Sino-Japanese war, or would it stop short of it? And even if it stops short of it, would the US get involved?
You know, I don't know, because the subtext out here is that the Americans are, nobody else can encourage, as you said, the Japanese to do this. I would take those 3 points that Srabani mentioned, the factors which are, let's say, creating the motivations for Japan to take the kind of stand it is. I would bring in another, which is that Japan is essentially now also talking to Asia, where you have some concerns now, particularly among the smaller Southeast Asian countries of China's neighbors, about China's rise, the kind of power China is going to be, the activities in the South China Seas. And I think somewhere Japan is not going to be able to make a very convincing case for itself unless it can also get these smaller countries on board with it. There, I'm afraid it's going to be a mixed kind of a picture, but I don't think that these countries are going to so easily walk on to the Japanese side, because Japan's particularly stand on history, and we go back to World War II. And by the way, the anniversary is coming, and both sides are gearing up. Xi Jinping and China have prepared this huge, and Japan is going to be at the forefront of the kind of projection that they will want to give to their World War II commemorations. Japan has its act cut out. I think not many people will go along with Japan's perceptions or Japan's positions, but this fear or these apprehensions are what Japan is hoping to work on.
Ambassador Seth, excuse me, how do you read China's reaction to the Japanese white paper and the kind of international publicity they're generating? Because they say that Japan's reaction is two-faced and is a threat to peace and security in the region. What do they mean by that? What do they mean by saying Japan is two-faced?
Yeah, well, I think you have to see it in the way roles have been totally reversed. As Alka said just now, there was this history in the 50s and 60s, and there was a lot of animosity towards Japan in many countries of Southeast Asia. I'm not about China and Korea, which are special issues, but even in the Philippines and Vietnam, Indonesia and so on. Now, because of the assertiveness of China and the strong exercise of Japan's soft power, its technology, the ODA that they have been giving to all of Southeast Asia, and the infrastructure they have built up in countries like ours and several others in the region, the image of Japan today is quite the opposite of what it was in the 50s and 60s. Japan is the soft, less assertive, more benign power. China is the threatening power. This we have to understand. That's the difference.
Okay. Srabani, why has Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said that doesn't matter, these structures are there, we object to them, but this will not affect bilateral relations with China? Do you agree with him, given Chinese reaction to what Japan has been doing?
I think when an incident takes place, it is natural for both the parties with respect to the incidents to make some noises.
Yeah.
But to assume that these would be, this issue definitely is not that will bring to a standstill the dialogue that has begun. Rather, what it would probably do from both the ends is, for China, I think China will now go strong on seeking faster resolution to this issue of demarcations of the EEZ zone. And Japan, on the other hand, I'm sure, which is not probably being revealed, has their own plans of what they would consider as the EEZ zone. Because oil being one, the fishery aspect is very strong. Both the countries have large fishing zone in this area. So they would be definitely looking at that aspect, because that happens to be the people's call. So effectively, for Japan, to negate a bilateral dialogue, I think would not happen at this stage.
Okay. Alka, you've already talked about what this dispute does to some of the smaller countries in the region. So could you say something more about how it affects the region if this dispute escalates? Does it affect India at all, or we can be sort of neutral watchers and just wait and watch and see how things happen and see how these big countries behave without taking sides?
See, it affects us to the extent that even we have a view on the so-called expansionism. Prime Minister Modi referred to it when he went to Japan, and the clear implication was China. We have also made a point of objecting to China's protests about our activities in the Vietnamese EEZ when we were going in for commercial drilling. Yes. So to that extent, India's concerns would be to also express its dissatisfaction. If that's a mild word, it would also express its concerns, its worries about a China that is going to be much more strongly asserting its presence. Having said that, I would say that India is also trying to take now a middle path. It can legitimately take the view that this is a problem between China and Japan. I mean, they have to sort it out. Why should we get into it? I mean, the Chinese, for instance, have had their strongest ire against the Americans because they feel the Americans have no business dabbling into a dispute of contested territory between China and Japan, and they believe that that is the reason why they call Japan two-faced. That on the one hand, you are saying let's dialogue, let's agree to some kind of diplomatic means. On the other hand, at American pushing, you are actually upping the ante by constantly messing around in these waters which we are supposed to be agreeing about. So it's a complicated kind of a thing, and I think India will have to take a position on merits.
But why doesn't India take a position? We claim that we understand the world, we want to be a world power, but when it comes to even commenting on them, I'm not saying take sides, our External Affairs Ministry is quiet all the time.
No, I'll tell you, we are not quiet. One thing, America has very much a role here. Yeah. So does Australia, so do all people who use these waters for shipping, including ourselves. We are all concerned about what happens between China and Japan. It's not a China-Japan bilateral problem at all. It's all our problem. But we have taken a stand. Japan is invited to the Malabar naval exercises in October, after a gap of several years.
Even before this thing escalated?
Even before it escalated, we haven't de-invited them, and we're not likely to.
Okay, all right. We've run out of time. I'm sorry, Alka. I'd like to thank all of you, Ambassador Aftab Seth, Professor Alka Acharya, Professor Srabani, Choudhary, for coming here and participating in this discussion. That is all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week as usual. Till then, goodbye and thanks for watching India's World.